Have you ever noticed how some people completely change the environment around them just by their absence? They don't shout, they don't ask, they don't explain themselves. They simply withdraw. And suddenly, everything changes. Silence sets in, and with it, a collective discomfort. People start to miss it. They start to question themselves to try to understand. But what they want to understand, in fact, is not your absence, but what it reveals. That they no longer have control over you. The constant presence, the automatic yes, the forced smile. All of this is the language of someone who has been trained to never disappear. Since you were a child, you learned that your value lies in being available. For everyone. All the time. But what if, for a moment, you did things differently? If you decided not to respond immediately, not to justify every attitude, not to accept every invitation, what would happen? You would probably be surprised. Irritation, maybe even rejection. But that doesn't reveal something about you. Reveals about others, about how much they were used to manipulating you through your predictable responses. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So why does your absence bother you so much? Maybe because it exposes truths that no one wants to see. Because when you stop being predictable, you stop being manipulable. And that changes everything. There is a breaking point that happens silently. It doesn't come with explosions or confrontations. It starts with the simple act of choosing silence over reaction. The pause instead of the automatic response. Removal instead of confrontation. This breaking point is internal. It's when you decide that your energy is no longer a resource available to everyone. That your time, your space, and your peace are sacred. And when that happens, the world goes into crisis. Because the world has become accustomed to your guaranteed presence, your immediate response, your infinite disposition, and suddenly you're not there anymore. This creates discomfort. But this discomfort is not a sign of error. It is a sign of transformation. It's proof that you stopped being an emotional extension of others to become a whole individual. Jung called this the process of individuation, the path toward your true essence without the masks of persona, without the need for constant acceptance. Being unavailable in this context is not rejection. It's protection. It's not coldness. It is sovereignty. When you understand this, you start to look at other people's reactions differently. You are no longer offended by those who are irritated by your silence, because now you see it wasn't love, it was functionality. And the functional one, when it stops working, is discarded. But the authentic, the whole, is feared. Because it cannot be controlled, you donate. He always donated. To maintain peace, to avoid conflicts, to not lose people. You say yes, even when you feel no screaming inside. Responds quickly, even when tired. He explains himself, justifies himself, tries to be understood, as if he owed something to the world. But what are you left with at the end of the day? Tiredness, frustration, a void that cannot be explained. And do you know why? Because you are being too available to those who don't deserve even a minute of your silence. Always being accessible, emotionally, physically, psychologically, is not a gift. It's a prison. And the more you repeat this pattern, the more you disappear from yourself. Jung talked about the persona, the mask we use to be accepted. And this mask is often made of excessive availability. You are not seen as someone, you are seen as a resource, an emotional button that others press when they need attention, relief, validation. And then, they return you to the shelf, as if you were disposable. This is cruel. But even more cruel is that you continue to offer yourself in this game. The yaker. Truth is that no one respects what they don't need to achieve. And always being present, always saying yes is the shortest path to invisibility. You need to relearn how to say no. Disappearing, not responding, leaving in a vacuum those who only appear to suck. Because only then will you start to be respected, and not for everyone, but for the right ones. The greatest source of human exhaustion is not in what we do, but in what we allow others to do to us. You feel it. Every time you answer something you didn't want, every time you get into useless arguments, every time you try to please someone you don't value, a piece of your energy is lost. And this energy, according to Carl Jung, is your life force. He called it psychic energy, that which moves your mind, your emotions, your presence. Every time you react impulsively, that energy is drained. When you respond to criticism that didn't even deserve attention, when you try to prove something to someone who never valued you, you are wasting your soul for nothing, and what's left is exhaustion. vulnerability. And when we are vulnerable, we become an easy target. Manipulative people smell this. They don't need to shout or threaten. They only activate your emotional triggers, and you react. Always. Because you haven't yet learned to save your energy. And that, Jung said, is true power. Choosing where, when, and how to act. It's not about being cold, but about being selective. Know how to observe before responding. Knowing how to remain silent when the other person just wants to drag you into chaos. This self-control changes everything. You enter an environment and your presence imposes itself even in silence. Because now your energy is with you and not scattered around in useless reactions. That's respect. That's power. This is individuation. The world has no mercy on those who give too much. And that's why, from now on, you need to start turning off the emotional taps that drain you every day. There is a dark territory that few people explore, silent manipulation. The one that happens without harsh words, without shouting, without imposition. It's the one that happens when someone triggers your sense of guilt, when you feel bad about saying no, when you feel like you owe someone something, even without knowing exactly what. Jung called this projection, the act of projecting onto others what we cannot face in ourselves. But there is a subtle and dangerous detail here. The more emotionally available you are, the more you become the receptacle of these projections. You become the hero, the savior, the therapist, the unconditional friend. But only as long as you serve, while playing the role expected of you. And why do you accept this? Because you fear disappointing, fear not being loved, fear of being abandoned. But the most efficient manipulation doesn't come from shouting. It comes from silence, from the look that charges, from the message that presses, from the disappearance that forces you to react. The manipulator doesn't want to control you with force. He just needs you to keep reacting like you always have. But the day you stop responding, the game breaks. The day you say no, the disguise falls. And when that happens, others despair. Not because they loved you, but because they lost control over you. His absence becomes a threat. Your silence becomes a mirror. And there is nothing more disturbing than staring at your own reflection. But you are ready. Ready to get out of the paper you were given and write your own. And this roadmap starts with a simple step: no longer being available. Have you ever noticed how silence bothers you more than 1,000 words? Not that cold, contemptuous silence, but lucid, intentional, strategic silence. The silence of those who chose not to react. This silence changes the game. Because while you were talking, explaining, justifying yourself, others were still in control. But when you shut up, they lose the script. They no longer know how to reach you. And then they begin to reveal themselves. Then comes the demand, the accusation, the emotional drama. Everything to try to get a reaction out of you like before. But now it doesn't work anymore. Because you understand that silence is not weakness. It is dominance. Dominance over yourself, over your energy, over the space you occupy in the world. Jung saw silence as a fertile field for transformation. When you silence, you begin to observe. And he observes patterns that previously went unnoticed. Emotional repetitions, manipulation games, self-sabotage traps. Everything becomes clear. And clarity, in this noisy world, is a superpower. So don't be alarmed if they start saying that you are distant, strange, different. That's a good sign. It means you stopped being predictable. You stopped being useful in the emotional sense you expected. And that bothers you. But you didn't come into the world to be useful. You came to be whole. And being whole requires moments of silence. Moments where you listen to yourself more than you listen to the world. Where you respect yourself more than you try to please. True power begins when you learn to make peace with others' discomfort. And silence is your first step. There is a high price. In choosing silence, you will be misunderstood. You will be called cold, selfish, distant. But all of this says more about the speaker than about you. Because your silence confronts. It takes away from others the comfort of fitting you into a predictable role. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop giving yourself without limits, you become a mirror. And what that mirror reveals is not pretty. It shows deficiencies, unrealistic expectations, emotional dependencies. Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but rather by becoming aware of our darkness. And that's what your silence does. It brings to light what was hidden. And anyone who doesn't want to look at this attacks. Try to bring yourself back to the old role, but you no longer fit in it. You understand that always making yourself available is self-abandonment in disguise, that living by explaining your limits is allowing them to invade your territory, and that living to please is dying a little inside, every day. So yes, you will be criticized. But these criticisms are medals. They are a sign that you have finally chosen yourself. And choosing yourself is not selfish. It's necessity. Because if you don't prioritize yourself, no one will do it for you. Silence then becomes your most powerful statement. He says, I am with me now. And whoever wants to be by my side, let him come in full. Because you no longer accept halves, and a lot less crumbs. Jung said that the process of becoming who we really are requires isolation. But not a sad, desperate isolation. It is a sacred isolation. A period where you learn to listen to your own voice without the noise of the world. Without the pressure to please, without the need to respond, without the obligation to be there for everyone. And in that space, something magical happens. You start to rebuild yourself. You start to rediscover what you like, what you believe, and what really matters. And then slowly what was once empty is filled with presence. Your own presence. It's no longer a lack. It is completeness. And this new version of you is scary. Because now you don't have to beg for attention anymore. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You no longer need to accept what doesn't serve you. You are enough. And in that sufficiency, you become rare. Because while the world runs after validation, you move towards your essence. Being misunderstood will be part of it. People will move away. Some because they don't understand, others for not accepting. But they will all show you who was there for you because of who you are, and who was there just for convenience. And that frees you, because now you are no longer available for superficial relationships, for empty conversations, for uncontrolled emotions. You are only available to what expands your soul. And that, my friend, is the beginning of true freedom. You think you lost people. But in fact, you freed yourself from bonds that only existed because you were functional. The people who walk away when you protect yourself were never really there for you. They had the version of you that was useful, predictable, convenient. And losing it is not a loss, it's a deliverance. When you stop being available for everything, you start to become valuable. Because what is rare is respected. What is scarce is preserved. But what is always available, always accessible, becomes invisible. And you weren't born to be invisible. You were born to be whole. But being whole requires courage. Courage to disappoint, to be misunderstood, to be rejected. Because only those who endure being misunderstood can live the truth. Carl Jung said that true growth lies in breaking with the collective. The moment you stop living through the eyes of others and start living through your own, that's scary. But it also frees. Because now you don't sell yourself for crumbs. He no longer accepts being a stage for the projection of others. And this change, although painful, is the rebirth of your identity. From here on, your every decision starts to come from within. No more need to please, but the desire to be true to yourself. And this loyalty is the greatest act of love you can practice. Now that you have withdrawn, that you have cut the threads that held you back, true silence begins. Not that uncomfortable, but the silence that heals, that fills, that reorganizes. At first it seems empty, but soon you realize that this void is fertile. This is where clarity is born. This is where your energy comes back to you, and with it, your identity. Jung said that there is no individuation without solitude, because it is in solitude that you listen to yourself. And when you listen, you stop betraying yourself. You stop adapting to environments that suffocate you. You stop insisting on relationships that only exist by inertia. And then, everything changes. You stop being a reaction and become a creation. It stops being a reflection and becomes its own light. And those who remain? These deserve your silence, your presence, your truth. Because they passed the hardest test, loving you even when you were no longer useful. When you make yourself unavailable to the world, you become available to yourself. And then real life begins, the one where you no longer accept emotional remains, where you choose your peace above any appearance, where you understand that being loved is worthless if, to do so, you need to abandon yourself. So, if you've made it this far, take a deep breath. You are being reborn. And this rebirth may hurt, but it transforms you into someone unbreakable. And now you finally understand. When you stop being available, everything changes, including you.